The year is 1943. In a dark restaurant booth on Chicago's North Side, a thin man in a perfect suit cuts his steak with careful, exact moves. He is slow and thoughtful. To someone just looking, he seems like a regular businessman having dinner. The other people eating do not look at him twice. They do not know they are eating just 20 feet away from the most powerful criminal in America. Paul, the waiter Ricca, controls a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He gets respect from all over the country. He gets fear from people who go against him. His power reaches into the highest parts of government, police, and Hollywood. But his name is almost never in the newspapers. His picture is not known by the public. This is exactly how he likes it. While Al Capone wanted to be famous and paid the price, and while other crime bosses showed off their money and power, Paul Ricca became an expert at not being seen. He knew that real strength was in the shadows. He knew that quiet words were stronger than loud shouts. He knew the most dangerous enemy is often the one you do not see coming. Tonight, as he finishes his meal and leaves a small tip, he is running operations from Las Vegas to Hollywood, from the Chicago docks to the Miami nightclubs. Labor unions do what he says. Movie studios pay money to his group. Politicians ask for his okay before they make big decisions. But to understand how Paul Ricca became the most powerful man you have never heard of, we need to start at the beginning. Before we begin this amazing true story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. This trip through the hidden history of organized crime will take us across many years and countries, showing secrets that have been buried for a long time. If you are here for the long trip ahead, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We are about to learn about one of the most interesting and forgotten people in American crime history. A man who had more power than most presidents while staying almost unknown to the public. Now let us learn about the rise and rule of Paul, the waiter, Ricca. The story starts not in the streets of Chicago, but in the sunny hills of Sicily in 1897. Felice de Lucia, the name Paul Ricca was born with, came into the world in the small town of Acrepalda in the province of Avellino. This was not the pretty Sicily of postcards, but a tough, hard land where staying alive meant understanding power in its simplest form. Acrepalda was a place where old, unwritten rules still controlled daily life. Here, respect was not given. It was earned through strength, cleverness, and total loyalty to family. The young Felice learned these lessons from his earliest days. He watched how his father, a simple farmer, moved through the complicated web of local politics and unofficial justice that kept their small town working. The Sicily of Ricca's childhood was full of social problems. The new Italian government had brought red tape, but not much wealth to the island. Local tough guys filled the empty space left by the weak central government, creating a second system of justice and business that would later be sent to America. But even in this place of normal violence and unofficial power structures, young Felice was different. His classmates and neighbors would later remember a boy who was very calm for his age, who seemed to think about every word before speaking, and who had an almost magical ability to understand the hidden meanings in adult conversations. When Felice was 11 years old, something happened that would shape how he saw the world. A fight had started between his father and a neighboring landowner over water rights. This was a matter of life and death in the dry Sicilian countryside. The local authorities were useless, bribed by the richer landowner. The normal ways to get justice had failed. But within a week, the problem fixed itself. The neighboring landowner suddenly became reasonable, even generous in his dealings with Felice's father. Years later, Ricca would tell friends that this was when he first understood that real power worked outside official channels. That true influence was used quietly and with exactness. The boy began paying closer attention to the men who seemed to get respect without having official jobs. He studied how they acted, how others listened to them, how problems seemed to disappear when they got interested. These were not the crude bullies he saw in schoolyards, but smart operators who knew that how things looked was often more powerful than reality. As he became a teenager, Felice's reputation for unusual maturity and quietness grew. Local shop owners began asking for his opinion on matters that seemed too old for him. He had a natural understanding of human nature, an ability to see past fake fronts and know people's real reasons. More importantly, he learned to keep these thoughts to himself unless sharing them was useful. The young man's school education was limited, which was common for his time and social class. But his real education continued every day on the streets and in the cafes of Acropalda. He learned the art of the favor, how to collect debts of thanks without seeming to do it on purpose. He mastered the skill of listening, understanding that information was often more valuable than money. By the time he was 17, Felice had already started building a network of relationships that went far beyond his small hometown. He had become known as someone who could be trusted with secrets, who could introduce the right people to each other, and who never forgot a favor or an insult. But chances in southern Italy in the early 1900s were limited, even for someone with Felice's special talents. The big wave of Italian people moving to America was at its peak, and stories of opportunity in the New World filtered back to even the smallest Sicilian towns. America meant not just money-making chances, but a clean start where a smart young man could completely remake himself. The choice to leave was not made lightly. Sicily was family, tradition, and the known parts of a predictable social order. America was the unknown, but also unlimited possibility. For someone like Felice, who had already grown too big for the limits of his birthplace, the choice became clear. In 1914, at age 17, Felice de Lucia got ready to leave everything he had ever known. He would get on a ship carrying only a few things and a smart understanding of power that had taken him years to learn. When he next stepped on solid ground, it would be in New York Harbor, and the young Sicilian would begin the change that would eventually make him one of the most powerful men in America. The trip across the Atlantic in 1914 was a deep change for the young man who would become Paul. Ricca, packed into the cheapest part of the ship with hundreds of other hopeful immigrants. He felt firsthand what it was like to be powerless and out of place. The conditions on the ship were bad. Cramped spaces, not enough food, and the constant reminder that he and his fellow passengers were thought of as the lowest class by the people on the upper decks. But Felice de Lucia had something that made him different from the other travelers: an ability to find opportunity even in the hardest times. Within days of getting on the ship, he had found the unofficial leaders among the immigrant passengers, the men who settled fights, organized the sharing of precious supplies, and kept order in the chaotic lower decks. He did not try to challenge these men directly. Instead, he made himself useful. His ability to speak several Italian dialects made him a natural translator between passengers from different areas. His calm attitude and careful listening skills made him a trusted helper in small arguments. By the time the ship reached New York, he had built a reputation as someone who could be counted on, a quality that would help him in the hard months ahead. Ellis Island was a surprise of American efficiency and government power. Here, Felice saw how official authority worked in his new country, with forms, documents, and step-by-step processing that was both more orderly and more impersonal than anything he had seen in Sicily. He remembered these observations, understanding naturally that succeeding in America would require learning both official and unofficial systems of power. The immigration officers who processed him saw just another young Italian worker looking for opportunity in America. They had no way of knowing that this quiet teenager had a smart understanding of how organizations work and human thinking. When they wrote his name as Felix de Lucia, a common American spelling, he accepted it without argument. He had learned that names were tools that could be changed when needed. York City in 1914 was a confusing maze of opportunity and danger for a newly arrived immigrant. The Lower East Side, where Felice found his first place to stay, was a tight pack of new arrivals from all over Europe, each group keeping its own neighborhoods, customs, and unofficial power structures. Italian immigrants gathered in Little Italy. But even within this community, there were sharp splits based on where people came from in Italy, family connections, and when they arrived in America. Felice's first challenge was simple survival. His limited English and lack of connections made finding real work hard. Like many new arrivals, he took whatever jobs he could find, loading trucks, sweeping floors, waiting tables. But unlike most immigrants who only focused on earning quick money, he treated each job as a chance to gather information. While working in restaurants, he watched how different kinds of customers acted with staff and each other. He noticed which customers got respect, who seemed to have unusual influence even though they looked ordinary, and how money really moved through the business. Serving rich diners taught him about American class differences, while working next to other immigrants showed him the order. Within ethnic communities, his big break came through a chance meeting at a small restaurant where he worked as a waiter, a job that would later give him his famous nickname. A regular customer, an older Italian-American businessman, noticed Felice's unusual attention and quietness. Unlike other waiters who bothered people or listened in on talks, this young man seemed to know what people needed while staying almost invisible. The businessman, Joe Melli, was impressed enough to start conversations with the young waiter. What he found was a teenager with amazing insights into customer behavior and business operations. Felice had noticed patterns that the restaurant's owner had missed. Which dishes made the most money when customer traffic was busiest, and how small changes in service could make people spend more. More interestingly, Melli realized that this young man understood the careful art of hearing only what he should. In a restaurant, waiters always hear private conversations, but Felice showed a natural understanding of which information was sensitive and how to handle such knowledge correctly. This was a rare and valuable quality in certain circles. Melli began offering Felice small chances outside his restaurant work. At first, these were simple tasks: delivering messages, making introductions, setting up meetings between business contacts. But these jobs gave the young immigrant an education in how power really worked in Italian-American communities. He learned that the most influential men were not always those with the biggest businesses or the most obvious wealth. Real power often belonged to people who kept large networks of relationships, who could connect different groups, and who could be trusted to handle sensitive situations with the right care. Through Melli's network, Felice began meeting members of established Italian-American crime families. These were not the crude street thugs shown in exciting newspaper stories, but smart businessmen who knew how to move through both real and fake businesses. They dressed well, spoke carefully, and acted with a dignity that commanded respect. What impressed these men about the young Sicilian was not his physical strength or willingness to use violence, qualities they could find in any street tough. Instead, they saw his intelligence, his quietness, and his natural understanding of how organizations work. Here was someone who could be trained, developed, and trusted with more responsibility. By his second year in America, Felice had started the process of remaking himself. He studied American customs and business practices with the same strong effort he had once used to understand Sicilian social rules. He improved his English through careful watching and practice, finally developing a way of speaking that was clear but never showy. The change was not just on the surface. He was learning to think like an American businessman while keeping the strategic instincts he had developed in Sicily. This combination would be his greatest strength: the ability to understand both the official and unofficial rules of American society and to move between them as needed. The final step in his early American education came when he decided to officially change his name. Felix de Lucia became Paul Ricca, a choice that showed both his growing sophistication and his understanding of American likes. Paul was respectably American while still honoring his Italian background. Ricca suggested success and wealth. The change was complete. The young Sicilian immigrant had become an American businessperson, ready for the opportunities ahead. Paul Ricca's entry into organized crime was not marked by dramatic violence or sudden discovery. Instead, it was a slow change that showed his careful way of doing all things. By 1919, he had spent 5 years in America, learning how both real and fake businesses worked, and he was ready to use these lessons in bigger ways. The spark was prohibition. When the 18th Amendment went into effect in January 1920, banning the making, sale, and moving of alcoholic drinks, it created the greatest business chance in American crime history. Overnight, a product that had been legal became illegal, creating huge profit chances for anyone willing to take the risks. But while most criminals saw prohibition as a chance to make quick money through bootlegging and speakeasy operations, Ricca understood that the real chance was in organization and planning. The successful operators would be those who could create reliable supply lines, keep quality control, and reduce police trouble through careful planning and strategic relationships. His first important involvement came through his growing relationship with Joe Melli's network. Melli had seen that large-scale alcohol moving would require the kind of systematic way that real businesses used, but changed for illegal operations. This meant coordinating many suppliers, managing transportation networks, keeping security, and handling the complex money arrangements that cash-only businesses needed. Ricca's special mix of skills made him very useful for these operations. His restaurant experience had taught him about supply line management and customer service. His understanding of human nature helped him find trustworthy partners and spot possible problems before they became serious. Most importantly, his instinct for keeping a low profile meant he could work well without attracting unwanted attention. His first jobs involved what might be called quality control and customer relations. Ricca would visit speakeasies and private clients to make sure they were happy with product quality and delivery times. But these seemingly routine tasks gave him complete knowledge of the whole distribution network, information that would be very useful as he moved up in the VA organization. He also showed a talent for solving problems that mixed business sense with psychological insight. When arguments came up between different levels of the distribution network, between suppliers and movers, or between movers and stores, Ricca showed amazing skill at finding solutions that made all sides happy while keeping operational security. One event from this time shows his growing reputation for smart problem solving. A valuable shipment of imported liquor had been taken by federal agents, but the situation suggested that someone inside the organization had given information to the police. Such situations usually led to violent payback based on suspicion and anger. Instead, Ricca did what amounted to an internal investigation. He systematically analyzed who had known about the shipment's route and timing, who might have money reasons to betray the organization, and who had the chance to talk to federal agents. His step-by-step way found the real informant while protecting several people who had been suspected. The solution was handled quietly and permanently. But what impressed his bosses was not just the result. It was Ricca's systematic way of handling a problem that others would have handled through crude threats. Here was someone who could think several steps ahead, and who understood that lasting criminal businesses needed the same careful management as real businesses. As his reputation grew, Ricca began getting more important jobs. He was asked to work with different criminal organizations that needed to cooperate for large-scale operations. This job needed special diplomatic skills, as it involved managing relationships between groups that were natural competitors and possible enemies. His success in these working together jobs came from his understanding that criminal organizations, like all human groups, worked on a mix of formal and unofficial relationships. The formal structure might say that certain people had authority over specific areas or operations, but the unofficial relationships based on personal loyalty, mutual respect, and shared interests often decided how things really worked. Ricca was excellent at finding and building these unofficial relationships. He understood who really made decisions inside each organization, who could be trusted to keep deals, and who had the influence to solve fights when they came up. More importantly, he learned how to place himself as a valuable partner for many organizations without seeming to favor any particular group. This neutrality became one of his greatest strengths. While other criminals built their careers by showing loyalty to specific leaders or organizations, Ricca made himself as someone who could be trusted by everyone because he was not seen as a threat to anyone. He was the helper, the problem solver, the man who made complex operations run smoothly. By 1923, he had become what might be called a criminal consultant, someone that different organizations turned to when they needed skill in planning, people management, or strategic thinking. This position gave him unique insight into how the most successful criminal businesses worked while building relationships with leaders across the whole range of organized crime. His reputation for quietness became famous. Associates knew they could discuss sensitive matters in his presence without fear that information would be shared wrongly. This trust gave him access to strategic information that few others had. Knowledge that would be very useful as he began planning his own rise to leadership. The final part in his early criminal education was learning to manage relationships with crooked officials. Prohibition had created never-before-seen chances for corruption at all levels of government and police. Successful criminal businesses needed reliable protection from police raids, good treatment in the courts, and early warning of major enforcement actions. Ricca showed special skill at building these relationships without creating unnecessary exposure. He understood that crooked officials needed to keep believable deniability, and he set up arrangements to protect both sides. His way was always indirect, professional, and focused on long-term relationships rather than short-term deals. By 1925, Paul Ricca had finished his change from Sicilian immigrant to smart American criminal businessperson. He had mastered the complex skills needed for large-scale, illegal operations while keeping the low profile that would become his special mark. He was ready for the opportunity that would define his career. His introduction to Al Capone's organization, the first meeting between Paul Ricca and Al Capone, happened in late 1925 in a simple restaurant on Chicago's near West Side. To casual watchers, it seemed to be nothing more than a business lunch between two successful Italian-American business people. The reality was much more important. This meeting would shape the future of organized crime in America for the next 40 years. Capone, in 1925, was already an important figure in Chicago's underworld, but he was still years away from becoming the national star that history would remember. He was 26 years old, ambitious, and in the process of taking control over Chicago's South Side alcohol distribution network. But he was also beginning to understand that his aggressive, high-profile way of doing business was creating problems that needed more sophisticated solutions. Ricca, at 28, was already known within criminal circles as someone who could solve complex organizational problems. His reputation had reached Chicago through the network of relationships he had built during his years in New York, when Capone's advisor suggested that he might benefit from talking with the Sicilian problem solver. A meeting was set up. The difference between the two men was immediately clear. Capone was outgoing, showy, and got attention wherever he went. He wore expensive suits, drove fancy cars, and liked being recognized as a person of importance. Ricca was quiet, simple, and seemed to blend into the background. His clothes were well made, but never showy. His manner was respectful, but not overly polite. What impressed Capone was not Ricca's personality. It was his analytical way of handling business problems. During their first conversation, Ricca showed an understanding of Chicago's criminal scene that was both complete and subtle. He had clearly studied the various organizations, areas, and key people. But his analysis went beyond simple information gathering. Ricca understood the structural problems that were limiting Chicago's criminal businesses. The various gangs were using huge amounts of energy, fighting each other over territory when cooperation could increase profits for everyone. Police pressure was increasing because of the high-profile violence linked to gang fights. Most importantly, the current way was not sustainable. It attracted too much attention and created too many enemies. During that first meeting, Ricca presented what amounted to a strategic plan for Chicago organized crime. His idea involved reducing gang violence through area agreements and profit-sharing arrangements. He suggested creating buffer organizations that could handle interactions with police and real businesses. Most radically, he said that the most successful leaders would be those who learned to work behind the scenes, letting others take credit and attract attention while they kept real control. Capone was interested, but not completely convinced. His own rise had been based on showing strength and creating fear. The idea of purposely seeking invisibility seemed wrong, but he saw that Ricca's way had produced results. The Sicilian had built influence without creating the kind of enemies that needed constant watching. The test of their relationship came when Capone offered Ricca a job within his organization. Rather than accepting immediately, Ricca asked for time to think about the offer. This answer surprised Capone, who was used to having people eager to connect with his growing power. But Ricca's careful way impressed him. Here was someone who made decisions based on careful analysis rather than immediate chance. When Ricca finally accepted Capone's offer, it came with conditions that showed more of his strategic thinking. Rather than looking for a highly visible leadership position, he asked for a role that would give him access to all parts of the organization's operations. He wanted to understand how every piece worked, from street-level collections to high-level political relationships. His title was simple. He was officially an advisor on how to work efficiently, but this role gave him the chance to study and improve every part of Capone's business. He looked at the alcohol distribution network, finding problem spots and security weaknesses. He studied the organization's money systems, finding ways to improve cash flow and reduce losses. Most importantly, he watched the human relationships that decided how the organization actually worked. Ricca's influence on Capone's operations was immediate and deep. He brought step-by-step ways to problems that had before been handled through feeling and force. He created backup communication systems that let the organization keep working, even when key people were arrested or killed. He made rules for handling interactions with police that reduced both risks and costs. But his most important contribution was strategic. Ricca helped Capone understand that their business was becoming too dependent on his personal involvement and public image. If something happened to Capone, whether through legal problems, violence, or other situations, the whole organization would be in danger. They needed to create systems that could survive leadership changes. This insight led to one of Ricca's most important new ideas: the development of what would later be called the corporate model for organized crime. Instead of depending on a single charming leader, the organization would be structured like a business company with different levels of management, special departments, and clear chains of command and communication. Putting this model into action needed subtle changes that did not immediately attract attention. Decision-making processes were shared across many people. Key relationships with crooked officials were managed through go-betweens. Financial records, such as they were spread out to prevent any single police action from exposing the whole business. Capone at first resisted some of these changes, particularly those that reduced his direct involvement in day-to-day operations. But as the benefits became clear, increased profits, reduced police pressure, and improved operational security, he became one of Ricca's strongest supporters inside the organization. The relationship between Capone and Ricca grew into something unique in the world of organized crime, a partnership between a charming leader and a strategic planner. Capone remained the public face of the organization, handling media relations and keeping the reputation for strength that scared competitors. Ricca worked behind the scenes, making sure the organization's operations were efficient, secure, and profitable. This split of jobs suited both men's personalities and strengths. Capone enjoyed the recognition and status that came with leadership, while Ricca preferred the safety and flexibility that came with working in the shadows. More importantly, it created a model that would influence organized crime leadership for generations. By 1927, their partnership had changed Chicago's underworld. The Capone organization had become the most sophisticated and money-making criminal business in America. Violence had not been removed, but it had been reduced to only when it was strategically necessary. Profits were higher, risks were lower, and the organization's ability to last long-term had been greatly improved. But Ricca was already thinking beyond the current situation. He understood that prohibition would not last forever, and he was getting ready for the day when the organization would need to find new sources of money. More immediately, he was worried about Capone's increasing fame, which was attracting federal attention that threatened everything they had built. His worries would prove correct. Within 4 years, federal lawyers would build the case that would send Al Capone to prison and create the chance for Paul Ricca to come out of the shadows and claim leadership of one of America's most powerful criminal organizations. Under Al Capone's guidance, Paul Ricca got a complete education in large-scale criminal business that would help him throughout his career. But this was not passive learning. Ricca actively studied every part of the organization, constantly finding chances for improvement and growth. His way was systematic, almost like school, treating organized crime as a complex business challenge that needed smart solutions. The Capone organization of the late 1920s was already the most advanced criminal business in America, but it was still changing from a collection of street gangs into something like a modern company. Ricca played a key role in this change, bringing analytical strictness to operations that had before been managed through instinct and tradition. His first big job was reorganizing the alcohol distribution network. The existing system had grown naturally without strategic planning, resulting in problems that cost the organization millions of dollars each year. Routes were repeated, security was not consistent, and quality control was almost non-existent. Competing groups inside the organization sometimes worked against each other, hurting overall effectiveness. Ricca approached this challenge like a management consultant, analyzing a real business. He mapped out every part of the distribution system from first suppliers to final customers. He found problem spots, security weaknesses, and chances for cost reduction. Most importantly, he analyzed the human elements. Which people and groups were most reliable? Who had the best relationships with customers? And where personality conflicts were getting in the way of operations. The solution he suggested was new for its time. A central planning system that treated alcohol moving like any other wholesale business. Instead of many competing networks, there would be connected systems with clear chains of command, standard procedures, and regular performance checks. Territory would be given based on how efficient operations were rather than historical claims or personal relationships. Making this happen needed special diplomatic skills. Ricca had to convince established gang leaders to accept less independence in exchange for increased profits. He had to rebuild relationships that had been based on personal loyalty and replace them with professional arrangements based on performance and results. Most challengingly, he had to do this without creating the kind of bad feeling that could lead to internal war. His success in managing this change showed skills that would help him throughout his career. Rather than forcing changes through power or authority, he built agreement by showing each affected side how the new system would help them personally. He created change arrangements that let people save face while getting used to new roles. Most importantly, he made sure the benefits of reorganization were shared widely so that everyone felt they had gained something from the changes. The results were dramatic. Within 18 months, the organization's alcohol distribution network was making 40% more money while needing much less management attention. Quality complaints almost disappeared as standard procedures made sure products and service were consistent. Security problems dropped sharply as professional rules replaced the random arrangements that had before described the business. But Ricca's education went far beyond operational management. He also studied the organization's money systems, learning how large amounts of cash could be handled safely and efficiently. This was a complex challenge in an era before electronic banking, when all deals needed physical money and record-keeping had to be good, enough for management purposes while staying simple enough to be destroyed quickly if needed. He created new ways to hide illegal money that were years ahead of their time. Instead of the simple methods usually used by criminals, just mixing illegal profits with real business income, Ricca made complex systems that involved many layers of transactions and paperwork. Money would flow through a series of real businesses, each of which would do actual services that explained their part in the process. This way had many advantages. It gave better security against police investigation, as each transaction could be defended as real business activity. It created tax advantages, as carefully arranged setups could reduce overall tax bills. Most importantly, it built the foundation for long-term wealth building, as properly hidden money could be invested in real things that would grow in value over time. Ricca also studied the organization's relationships with crooked officials, learning the careful art of political influence. This was perhaps the most sophisticated part of the whole business, needing deep understanding of how American political systems actually worked. Successful corruption needed knowing not just who could be bought, but how to set up arrangements that protected all sides while making sure performance was reliable. He learned that effective corruption was rarely as simple as direct bribery. The most reliable arrangements involved creating mutual dependencies that made it in everyone's interest to keep the relationship. This might involve helping officials with their own business plans, providing services that improved their political standing, or creating situations where the official's reputation would be damaged if the relationship became public. The education process also included contact with violence. Though Ricca's role in this part of the business was more analytical than operational, he studied how the organization's enforcement abilities worked, learning when violence was necessary, how it should be done to get the most effect with the least risk, and how to manage the results to prevent escalation or payback. His way with violence was characteristically systematic. Rather than seeing it as an emotional answer to problems, he understood it as a business tool that should be used strategically and rarely. Too much violence created unnecessary enemies and attracted unwanted attention from police. Too little violence could be seen as weakness, encouraging challenges from competitors or disobedience from underlings. Ricca developed what amounted to a rule for the strategic use of force. Violence should be predictable in how it was used so that people understood the results of certain behaviors. It should match the offense so that responses did not create cycles of escalation. Most importantly, it should be done through go-betweens whenever possible to keep operational security and give believable deniability for leadership. Perhaps most importantly, Ricca learned to think beyond the immediate situation of Prohibition-era Chicago. He understood that successful criminal businesses needed to constantly adapt to changing legal, social, and money conditions. The current gold rush of illegal alcohol would not last forever, and the organization needed to develop abilities that would stay valuable in different situations. This long-term view influenced every part of his learning. He paid special attention to skills and relationships that could be moved to other illegal activities. He studied real businesses that shared operational qualities with criminal businesses. He built relationships with people who might be valuable partners in future plans. By 1930, Ricca had finished one of the most complete educations in criminal business ever done. He understood every part of large-scale legal operations, from street-level doing to strategic planning. More importantly, he had shown the ability to improve systems and processes, earning respect from both underlings and bosses inside the organization. But his education was about to get its final test. Federal investigators were building the case that would eventually send Al Capone to prison, creating a crisis of who would take over that would decide the future of Chicago organized crime. The skills Ricca had spent 5 years developing would now decide whether he could change from student to leader of one of America's most powerful criminal organizations. The nickname, the Waiter, came to define not just Paul Ricca's public image, but his whole way of power and leadership. Far from being a casual reference to his early job, this character was carefully built over many years as a strategic strength that would prove more valuable than any weapon or fortune. In a world where most crime bosses wanted attention and recognition, Ricca became perfect at hiding in plain sight. The foundation of the Waiter character was psychological rather than theatrical. Ricca understood that people have preset ideas about service workers. They are seen as invisible, not threatening, and beneath the notice of important people. A waiter is someone who serves others, who knows what people need, who stays quietly in the background until called. These qualities made the perfect disguise for someone who wanted to watch, analyze, and influence without being seen as a source of power. Ricca's physical look supported this impression. He was of average height and build, with ordinary features that did not get attention. He dressed well but simply, choosing clothes that suggested middle-class respectability rather than wealth or status. His manner was always polite and respectful, never aggressive or demanding. When he entered a room, most people would not look at him twice. But this simple outside hid one of the most sophisticated criminal minds of the 20th century. While others noticed only the humble waiter, Ricca was doing detailed psychological checks of everyone around him. He watched how people treated service workers, which showed their true character more clearly than their public behavior. He listened to conversations that people had freely in front of someone they thought was unimportant. He collected information that others never realized they were giving. The Waiter character also served an important operational job. In restaurants, hotels, and social clubs, service workers have access to private areas and secret conversations. They are present during sensitive meetings, but are not thought of as security risks. They can approach almost anyone without causing suspicion because service interactions are expected and normal. This access was very useful for someone who needed to gather information and build relationships across all levels of society. Ricca raised this natural advantage into a complete information gathering system. He kept relationships with service workers throughout Chicago: waiters, bartenders, hotel clerks, doormen, and others who had similar positions of invisible access. These people gave him a constant stream of information about the activities, relationships, and weak spots of Chicago's social, political, and business leaders. The information network went beyond Chicago to other cities where the organization had interests. Ricca understood that effective information needed steady sources in many locations. He built relationships with service workers in New York, Detroit, Kansas City, and other major cities, creating an early warning system that could alert him to developing chances or threats. But the Waiter character was more than just a tool for information gathering. It was also a smart psychological weapon. When people underestimated Ricca, they gave information and made decisions they would not have made if they had understood his true abilities. Competitors dismissed him as unimportant, giving him chances to outsmart them. Police officials focused on more obvious targets, letting him work with less checking. The psychological advantages went to negotiations and business relationships. When Ricca seemed to listen to others, they often became overconfident and made agreements they might not have offered to someone they saw as an equal. When he gave suggestions in a humble, service-oriented way, people were more likely to accept them than if they had been presented as demands or final offers. This way was particularly effective in dealing with real business people who needed to keep their reputations. A meeting with an obvious crime boss would create uncomfortable questions and possible scandals. But a quiet conversation with a well-dressed gentleman who seemed to be in the service industry could be explained away as normal business interaction. Ricca's character gave believable deniability for everyone involved in sensitive transactions. The waiter identity also protected him during police investigations. When federal agents made lists of suspected organized crime figures, they focused on people who fit their preset ideas about criminal leadership. Men who lived showily, commanded obvious respect, and were known for violent behavior. Ricca's carefully kept profile as a simple service worker made him almost invisible to these investigations. Even when police officials became aware of his importance, the waiter character kept giving protection. Lawyers found it hard to convince juries that this quiet, respectful man could be the leader of a huge criminal business. His appearance and manner went against everything that popular culture suggested about crime bosses. This disconnect between what people thought and reality became one of his most valuable strengths. Keeping this character needed constant discipline and attention to detail. Ricca had to resist the natural human wish to get recognition for his achievements. While other crime figures enjoyed the ego satisfaction that came with public acknowledgement of their power, he found satisfaction in the effectiveness of his operations and the loyalty of his underlings. He measured success by results rather than reputation. This discipline went to his personal life too. Ricca lived in simple neighborhoods, drove ordinary cars, and socialized mainly with people who were not connected to organized crime. His homes were comfortable but not showy. His fun activities were those of a middle-class business person. Dinner with family, occasional entertainment, quiet evenings at home. This lifestyle was not just disguise. It showed his understanding that true security came from not attracting attention. But perhaps the most sophisticated part of the waiter character was how it influenced his leadership style inside the organization. Rather than ruling through fear and threats, Ricca led through service and ability. He placed himself as someone whose main job was to help others succeed in their roles. This way created real loyalty rather than mere obedience, as people felt that their leader was truly concerned with their well-being and success. The service-oriented leadership style had practical advantages too. Underlings were more likely to share correct information with someone they saw as supportive rather than threatening. Problems were found and fixed more quickly when people felt comfortable bringing them to leadership's attention. The overall efficiency of the organization improved when everyone felt they were working together toward common goals rather than simply following orders from above. Ricca's way with meetings and decision-making showed this philosophy. Rather than controlling discussions, he often played the role of helper, asking questions and making sure all relevant views were heard. He made suggestions rather than giving orders, letting underlings feel ownership of decisions and their doing. When conflicts came up, he placed himself as a go-between, looking for solutions that would help everyone involved. This leadership way was new in the world of 1930s organized crime. Traditional criminal organizations were usually organized as strict levels with bossy leadership. Fear and threats were the main tools for keeping discipline and making sure people followed. Ricca showed that other ways could be more effective for building and keeping large, complex organizations. The waiter character also gave a model that other members of the organization could adopt when right. Ricca encouraged his underlings to develop their own versions of professional invisibility, teaching them to blend into real society while doing illegal business. This way reduced the organization's overall profile and made police investigation more difficult. By the early 1930s, the waiter character had become more than just Paul Ricca's personal trademark. It had become a defining quality of the organization he was increasingly leading. While Al Capone's showy way had made him a national star and a federal target, Ricca's systematic invisibility was creating a business that could work effectively while avoiding the attention that had destroyed so many other criminal leaders. The effectiveness of this way would be tested during the most challenging period of Ricca's career, the change from Prohibition to the Depression era, when the organization would need to find new sources of money while avoiding the federal investigators who were finally understanding the true nature of Chicago organized crime, while Paul Ricca's waiter character gave perfect disguise for his activities. His real power came from the smart network of relationships he built across all levels of American society. Understanding that lasting criminal businesses needed friends in real institutions, he spent years building connections with politicians, business people, labor leaders, and entertainment figures who could give protection, chances, and information. The foundation of Ricca's network-building plan was his recognition that everyone, no matter their official position or public reputation, had needs that could not be satisfied through normal channels. Politicians needed campaign money and voter organizing that could not be traced to controversial sources. Business people needed solutions to labor fights, regulatory problems, and competitive challenges that needed unusual ways. Even police officials sometimes needed help with personal or professional problems that their official resources could not address. Ricca placed himself and his organization as a resource that could help solve these problems quietly and effectively. But unlike simple corruption plans that involved simple exchanges of money for favors, his way created lasting relationships based on mutual benefit and shared interests. He understood that the most reliable friends were those who felt they were partners rather than buyers of criminal services. His first big success in real relationship building came through the labor movement. Chicago in the 1920s and 1930s was a center of intense labor management conflict, with strikes, lockouts, and sometimes violent fights disrupting whole industries. Both union leaders and management representatives discovered that Ricca's organization could give services that helped solve these conflicts in ways that helped all sides. For union leaders, the organization could give muscle to make sure that strike-breaking efforts were unsuccessful and that management negotiations were done in good faith. For management, the same organization could make sure that work started again quickly once agreements were reached and that radical parts inside unions did not disrupt operations. The key was that these services were given professionally and quietly, without the simple threats that describe most criminal involvement in labor fights. Ricca's way with labor relations was characteristically smart. Rather than simply selling violence to the highest bidder, he placed his organization as go-betweens who could help find solutions that satisfied both workers and management. This needed deep understanding of the money factors that drove labor fights as well as the personal and political considerations that influenced union and management leaders. The success of these interventions led to ongoing relationships with key figures in many industries. Union leaders found that Ricca could be trusted to keep agreements and protect secret information. Management representatives discovered that problems solved through his involvement stayed solved without the repeated conflicts that often followed other kinds of intervention. These labor connections gave many benefits for Ricca's organization. They created real sources of money through consulting fees and success bonuses. They gave information about business conditions and chances in various industries. Most importantly, they established the organization as a respected player in Chicago's business community, opening doors to other kinds of real relationships. The political network was built through similar principles, but needed even more careful handling. Politicians faced unique risks when connecting with known criminals, as public exposure could end their careers. Ricca understood that successful political relationships needed many layers of separation and believable deniability for all sides involved. His solution was to work through go-betweens who kept arm's-length relationships with both the organization and the political figures they were building. These go-betweens were usually real business people or community leaders who had their own reasons for building political relationships. They could approach politicians with proposals that seemed to come from normal sources while actually representing the organization's interests. The political services offered were carefully chosen to give maximum value while reducing exposure risks. Campaign money was sent through many sources to avoid creating obvious patterns. Voter organizing efforts were done through real community organizations that had their own political interests. Information about opposing candidates' weak spots was given through channels that could not be traced to criminal sources, but the most valuable political service was problem-solving that did not involve obvious criminal activity. When politicians faced difficult situations, family scandals, business problems, or political challenges, Ricca's network could often provide solutions through real channels. These interventions created relationships of thanks and mutual dependence that were more reliable than simple money arrangements. The entertainment industry presented special chances that Ricca was among the first criminal leaders to see. Hollywood in the 1930s was becoming a huge industry with enormous money resources, but it was also weak to various kinds of disruption and manipulation. Labor fights could shut down productions. Bad publicity could destroy careers. Regulatory problems could cost millions of dollars. Ricca's first involvement in entertainment came through the labor connections he had already made. Entertainment industry unions faced the same challenges as other labor organizations, and they needed the same kinds of services that had made his organization valuable in other industries. But he quickly saw that entertainment offered chances that went far beyond normal labor relations. The industry's dependence on public image made it particularly weak to bad publicity, creating chances for both blackmail and real public relations services. The huge amounts of money involved in film production created needs for off-the-books financing and investment chances. The industry's connections to national and international markets gave possible ways for expanding the organization's geographical reach. Most importantly, the entertainment industry's need for security and quietness created chances for long-term relationships with industry leaders. Studio bosses, directors, and major stars all faced situations where they needed services that could not be gotten through normal channels. Ricca's organization could provide these services professionally and quietly, creating relationships that would prove valuable for decades. The network building process also went to police, though this needed the most careful handling of all. Direct corruption of police and federal agents was risky and often unreliable. Instead, Ricca focused on building relationships with people who had influence over police policy and priorities, but who were not directly involved in day-to-day criminal investigation. This way involved building relationships with political figures who controlled police budgets and appointments, business leaders who had influence over political figures, and community organizations that could affect public opinion about police priorities. Rather than trying to corrupt individual investigators, the goal was to influence the overall environment in which police worked. The sophistication of these relationship-building efforts showed Ricca's understanding that criminal organizations needed to change beyond simple stealing activities. Lasting success needed becoming part of the real power structures of American society. This joining could not be achieved through force or threats alone. It needed giving real value to real institutions and their leaders. By the mid-1930s, Ricca had created a network of relationships that went far beyond traditional organized crime activities. His organization was connected to labor unions, political parties, entertainment companies, and real businesses throughout the Midwest and beyond. These connections gave protection, chances, and information that would prove very useful during the challenging changes ahead. The network would face its first major test when Prohibition ended in 1933, removing the main source of money that had paid for the organization's growth. The relationships Ricca had, built during the boom years of illegal alcohol, would now decide whether the organization could successfully change to new sources of income and influence. End of Prohibition in December 1933 created the greatest crisis in the history of American organized crime. Overnight, the illegal alcohol trade that had made hundreds of millions of dollars in money became useless. Criminal organizations across the country faced a basic challenge: find new sources of money or fall apart. For Paul Ricca, this crisis became the chance to show the strategic thinking that would define his leadership for the next 30 years. While many crime bosses had focused only on maximizing short-term profits from bootlegging, Ricca had spent years getting ready for this change. His systematic study of the organization's operations had found many possible money sources that could replace alcohol smuggling. More importantly, his network-building efforts had created relationships that would be valuable, no matter changes in the legal status of specific products or services. The key to successful change was understanding that the end of Prohibition did not remove the demand for illegal services. It simply changed which services were most profitable. Americans would continue to want things they could not get legally, and they would continue to face problems that could not be solved through real institutions. The challenge was finding these needs and developing the abilities to serve them effectively. Ricca's analysis of the time after Prohibition was characteristically complete. He studied new trends in American society, legal changes that created new chances for illegal activity, and money developments that suggested where demand for criminal services might develop. His conclusions would reshape organized crime for generations. The most immediate chance was illegal gambling, which had always been a second money source for the organization, but had been overshadowed by the enormous profits from alcohol. With Prohibition ended, gambling could become the main focus of organizational resources and attention. But successful gambling operations needed different skills and relationships than alcohol moving had needed. Ricca understood that illegal gambling was basically a service business that depended on customer satisfaction and repeat business. Unlike alcohol, which was a product that customers used and then needed to replace, gambling was an experience that customers either enjoyed enough to continue or found bad enough to look for other choices. This meant that successful gambling operations needed smart attention to customer service, security, and reputation management. The organization's existing network gave big advantages for gambling operations. Political relationships that had protected alcohol shipments could also protect gambling places from police raids. Labor connections could make sure gambling places worked without disruption from union fights. Entertainment industry relationships could give access to high stakes customers who could afford big losses. But gambling also needed new abilities that the organization needed to develop. Successful operations needed mathematical skill to make sure that games were set up to guarantee long-term profitability while staying attractive to customers. They needed security systems that could prevent cheating by both customers and employees. Most importantly, they needed money management systems that could handle the complex cash flows that gambling operations created. Ricca approached these challenges by hiring experts from real industries who could bring professional skills to illegal operations. He hired mathematicians and statisticians who could design the best betting odds. He hired security professionals who could develop complete protection systems. He built relationships with accountants and money managers who could create smart money management systems. The second major chance was labor racketeering, which offered possibly unlimited money growth as American industry kept expanding. The organization's existing relationships with union leaders gave the foundation for more systematic involvement in labor management relations. But success in this area needed understanding the complex legal and money factors that controlled American labor relations. Labor racketeering was not simply a matter of getting money from unions or management. It involved becoming an essential part of the industrial relations system. This meant giving real services that all sides found valuable while making money through fees, percentages, and exclusive arrangements that could not be easily replaced by normal choices. The organization's way with labor relations became a model that other criminal groups would copy for decades. Rather than simply demanding payment from existing arrangements, they created new services and chances that made additional value for all participants. They developed training programs for union members, set up benefit funds that gave services not available through normal insurance, and created argument-solving methods that were more efficient than traditional complaint procedures. These activities made money through many channels. Management companies paid consulting fees for labor relations services. Unions paid percentages of dues increases that resulted from successful negotiations. Benefit funds made investment money that could be directed to organization-controlled businesses. Most importantly, the relationships developed through these activities gave access to other chances in related industries. The third major chance was expanding into new geographical areas where the organization's abilities could make money. During Prohibition, the Chicago organization had focused mainly on the Midwest, leaving other regions to local criminal groups. But Ricca saw that national expansion could give both increased money and protection against local police pressure. Expansion needed careful analysis of chances and risks in possible new areas. Each region had its own criminal organizations, political structures, and police abilities. Successful expansion meant either forming partnerships with existing groups or developing enough local relationships to work independently. Ricca's way with expansion was characteristically systematic. He sent representatives to possible new areas to do detailed information gathering about local chances, competitors, and risks. He set up business relationships that could serve as covers for criminal operations. Most importantly, he began building the same kinds of political and business networks that had given protection in Chicago. The first major expansion was into Las Vegas, a decision that would prove to be one of the most profitable in the organization's history. Nevada's making gambling legal in 1931 had created never-before-seen chances for criminal organizations that understood how to run large-scale gaming businesses. But success in Las Vegas needed different ways than illegal gambling in other cities. Legal gambling meant that operations were subject to regulatory watching, taxes, and public checking that illegal operations could avoid. But it also meant that successful operations could make enormous profits without the risks linked with illegal activities. The challenge was developing the real business skills necessary to work in a regulated environment while keeping the competitive advantages that criminal organizations had. Ricca's solution was to create mixed organizations that combined real business practices with the strategic advantages of criminal businesses. These operations employed professional managers who could handle regulatory compliance and day-to-day operations. They used normal accounting and money management systems that could withstand official checking. But they also benefited from the organization's ability to remove competition, make sure labor peace, and access money sources that were not available to purely real businesses. The Las Vegas operations became a testing ground for developing new ways with criminal business that would influence the organization's activities for decades. They showed that criminal organizations could work successfully in real industries when they adapted their methods to new regulatory and competitive environments. They also gave a model for expansion into other regulated industries that offered similar chances. By 1935, just 2 years after Prohibition's end, Ricca had successfully changed the organization from a special alcohol distribution network into a varied, criminal business with many money sources and nationwide reach. The change had been done without the violent conflicts that had destroyed many other criminal organizations during the same period. More importantly, the organization after Prohibition was stronger and more lasting than its earlier version had ever been. Money was more stable as it came from many sources rather than a single illegal activity. Operations were more secure as they involved services rather than products, and were therefore less weak to police stopping. Relationships with real institutions were stronger as they gave ongoing value rather than simply protecting illegal activities. The success of this change established Paul Ricca as one of the most sophisticated criminal leaders of his generation. His systematic way with organizational development had created a business that could adapt to changing legal and money conditions while keeping profitability and growth. The stage was set for the next part of his career, the Hollywood blackmail plan that would make him millions of dollars and establish him as the clear leader of Chicago organized crime. The Hollywood blackmail plan of the late 1930s represented the highest point of Paul Ricca's strategic thinking and operational sophistication. More than just a criminal business, it was a masterclass in understanding industry weak spots, using institutional weaknesses, and creating lasting money streams through the systematic use of pressure and influence. The plan would make millions of dollars for the Chicago organization while showing Ricca's change from practical operator to strategic planner. The foundation of the Hollywood plan lay in Ricca's early recognition that the entertainment industry had special qualities that made it weak to organized criminal use. Unlike traditional making or retail businesses, entertainment companies created products whose value was completely dependent on public opinion and market timing. A labor fight that delayed film production could cost millions of dollars. Bad publicity could destroy careers and investments almost overnight. Most importantly, the industry's enormous profits were concentrated in the hands of relatively few people who could be influenced through carefully used pressure. Ricca's first involvement in Hollywood came through the labor relationships he had built during his network-building efforts in the early 1930s. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, which represented technical workers in the film industry, was in a bitter fight with studio management over wages, working conditions, and recognition rights. Both sides needed help that normal labor relations methods could not provide. The Chicago organization's entry into this fight was not motivated purely by profit. It was a strategic decision based on Ricca's analysis of the entertainment industry's long-term potential. He understood that Hollywood was becoming one of America's most influential and profitable industries, and that early involvement could give access to chances that would be difficult to get later. The organization's first services to IATSE were normal labor support activities, making sure that strike-breaking efforts were unsuccessful, giving security during negotiations, and using pressure on management representatives who seemed unwilling to reach reasonable agreements. But Ricca quickly saw that the situation offered chances for much more sophisticated involvement. His breakthrough insight was understanding that Hollywood's labor fights were not really about wages or working conditions. They were about control. Studio bosses wanted complete authority over production processes and costs. Union leaders wanted recognition and influence over industry decisions. Both sides were willing to pay big amounts to achieve their goals, but neither could admit publicly that they were buying what amounted to private government services. Ricca's solution was to place the organization as neutral go-betweens who could help make agreements that both sides could accept without losing face. This needed understanding the real interests of all sides involved, rather than just their public positions. Studio bosses needed predictable labor costs and production schedules. Union leaders needed real benefits they could give to their members. Both sides needed to appear strong to their respective supporters. The go-between services the organization gave were truly valuable to all sides. Agreements reached through their help tended to be more complete and lasting than those negotiated through normal processes. Labor fights were solved more quickly with less disruption to production schedules. Most importantly, both sides felt they had achieved their essential goals without making unacceptable compromises, but the real genius of Ricca's way was that these go-between services created ongoing relationships with key figures throughout the industry. Studio bosses who had benefited from the organization's involvement in labor fights became possible friends in other matters. Union leaders who had achieved their goals through the organization's help became reliable sources of information and influence. These relationships gave the foundation for expanding the organization's involvement far beyond labor relations. Studio bosses faced many challenges that normal business resources could not address. Financing difficulties, regulatory problems, competitive threats, and personal scandals. The organization's growing network of relationships and resources could often provide solutions that were not available through normal channels. The change from service provider to systematic blackmailer was gradual and sophisticated. Rather than making simple demands for payment, the organization created situations where studio bosses found it advantageous to keep ongoing financial relationships. These arrangements were set up to appear real: consulting fees, insurance payments, or partnership investments in related businesses. The key insight was that studio bosses were already used to paying various forms of protection money to different groups. Labor unions, political organizations, and regulatory agencies all got payment through normal channels. The organization's demands seemed reasonable in comparison to the total amounts that studios were already paying for various forms of security and influence. The systematic nature of the plan became clear when the organization began coordinating activities across many unions in several major studios at the same time. Rather than handling each situation separately, they created complete arrangements that gave benefits to all participants while making maximum money for the organization. Union leaders found that their members received better wages and working conditions when they cooperated with the organization's broader strategies. Studio bosses discovered that their labor problems were more easily solved when they kept good relationships with the organization. Most importantly, everyone involved understood that these arrangements gave protection against competitors and outside threats that could disrupt their respective businesses. Money structure of the plan was characteristically sophisticated. Instead of demanding simple cash payments, the organization created complex arrangements that involved profit sharing, investment partnerships, and service contracts. These structures gave tax advantages for the studios while making many money streams for the organization. Some arrangements involved the organization giving real services, security, transportation, equipment leasing at high rates. Others involved investment partnerships where the organization gave money for film productions in exchange for percentage ownership of profits. The most sophisticated arrangements involved creating new companies that gave essential services to the studios while making money for the organization. Plan's success attracted national attention from police agencies, but Ricca's careful setup made investigation extremely difficult. The relationships between the organization and studio bosses appeared to be real business arrangements. Union leaders insisted that their members had benefited from the arrangements and opposed police interference. Most importantly, the money structures were complex enough that investigators could not easily tell which payments represented blackmail and which represented real business expenses. The investigation that eventually exposed the plan needed years of effort by federal lawyers and resulted in one of the most complex racketeering cases in American legal history. Even when the plan was finally prosecuted, many of the relationships and money streams it had created kept working in different forms. By the time federal investigators began building their case in the early 1940s, the Hollywood plan had made an estimated $15 million in money for the Chicago organization, equal to hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. More importantly, it had established the organization as a major player in the entertainment industry with relationships and influence that would continue making money for decades. The plan's success also established Paul Ricca's reputation as the most sophisticated criminal strategist of his generation. His ability to find industry weak spots, create mutually helpful arrangements, and make enormous profits while reducing legal exposure showed skills that few other criminal leaders had. But the plan's final importance lay in its showing of how organized crime could change from simple stealing activities to complex businesses that gave real value to real industries. The model Ricca created in Hollywood would be copied in other industries and other regions, basically changing the nature of American organized crime. The change of leadership from Al Capone to Paul Ricca was not marked by dramatic confrontation or violent fight for who would take over. Instead, it was a gradual process that showed Ricca's smart understanding of organizational relationships and his patient way of collecting power. When Capone was finally sentenced to federal prison for tax cheating in 1931, the Chicago outfit's leadership structure had already changed to handle his reduced involvement in day-to-day operations. Ricca's rise to leadership was not automatic or universally accepted. The organization included several veteran figures who had real claims to take over based on seniority, area control, or personal relationships with Capone. Frank Nitti, who had served as Capone's main helper, first took formal leadership of the organization. Tony Accardo controlled important street operations and commanded respect from enforcement people. Other figures kept control over special activities or geographical areas that gave them big independence. What made Ricca different from these other possible leaders was not raw ambition or willingness to use violence. It was his shown ability to solve complex problems and make lasting money. During the important change period from Prohibition to operations after it ended, he had been the planner of the organization's most successful adaptations. His Hollywood plan was making never-before-seen profits, while his labor racketeering operations gave steady money growth. Most importantly, his network of relationships with real institutions gave protection that no other leader could offer. The leadership change was complicated by federal police pressure that was never before seen in its scope and sophistication. The success that lawyers had achieved in convicting Capone had encouraged expanded investigations into organized crime activities. The Chicago organization faced at the same time inquiries from federal tax investigators, Labor Department officials, and FBI agents who were beginning to understand the scope and sophistication of modern criminal businesses. This outside pressure created inside challenges that needed the kind of strategic thinking that had become Ricca's specialty. The organization needed to keep operational effectiveness while reducing its exposure to police investigation. This needed making difficult decisions about which activities to continue, which relationships to keep, and which people could be trusted with sensitive responsibilities. Ricca's way with these challenges showed the leadership qualities that would define his time as boss. Rather than pulling back from police pressure or answering with increased violence, he adapted the organization's operations to the new environment. Activities that created unnecessary exposure were stopped or moved to other groups. Relationships with police and political figures were restructured to give better protection while reducing risks for all sides involved. The process of making leadership solid needed special diplomatic skills. Ricca needed to convince other senior figures that his leadership served their interests better than either independence or partnership with different leaders. This could not be done through threats alone. It needed showing that cooperation with his leadership would be more profitable and secure than other available choices. His way was characteristically systematic. He analyzed each senior figure's interests, abilities, and weak spots, then set up arrangements that gave them continued independence and increased profits in exchange for accepting his overall authority. These arrangements were not simple boss-underling relationships. They were smart partnerships that let each participant save face while contributing to collective success. The solid-making process was also helped by Ricca's reputation for fairness and ability. Unlike leaders who ruled through fear and unpredictability, he had established a record of making decisions based on rational analysis, rather than personal preferences or emotional reactions. Underlings understood that working with him was likely to be more profitable and secure than fighting against him. Frank Nitty's eventual suicide in 1943 when facing federal charges for his involvement in the Hollywood plan removed the last big challenge to Ricca's leadership. But by that time, the change had already been finished in all but formal terms. Ricca had been making the strategic decisions that decided the organization's direction for several years, while other figures had gradually accepted roles as doers of his policies rather than independent decision-makers. Leadership style that Ricca developed was new in the world of 1940s organized crime. Traditional crime bosses ruled through shows of strength and the understood threat of violence against anyone who challenged their authority. Ricca's way was more subtle and finally more effective. He led through ability, fairness, and the consistent delivery of results that helped everyone in the organization. His leadership philosophy was based on the understanding that lasting criminal businesses needed the same management principles that control successful real businesses. This meant clear chains of command and communication, rational giving of resources and responsibilities, systematic planning and checking of operations, and payment systems that rewarded performance rather than simple loyalty. Putting these principles into action needed extensive changes in how the organization worked. Decision-making processes that had been based on personal relationships and unofficial understandings were replaced with more systematic procedures. Money management, which had been handled through random arrangements, was made professional with regular accounting and reporting systems. Most importantly, the organization's culture changed from one based on fear and threats to one based on mutual respect and shared success. These changes were not put into action without resistance. Some veteran figures preferred the traditional ways that they understood and that had served them well during their own careers. Younger members sometimes saw the new ways as signs of weakness rather than sophistication. Outside competitors occasionally tested the organization's will, expecting that the reduced emphasis on violence showed reduced abilities. Ricca's answer to these challenges showed the steel beneath his diplomatic outside. When situations needed strong action, he could be as decisive and ruthless as any of his predecessors. But violence under his leadership was always strategic rather than emotional, matching rather than too much, and done through go-betweens who kept operational security for the organization's leadership. The effectiveness of his leadership way became clear during the challenging war years when the organization faced labor shortages, material restrictions, and increased federal watching while keeping profitability and area control. Operations that might have fallen apart under less skilled leadership not only survived, but often grew during this difficult period. By 1943, when he was officially recognized as the head of the Chicago outfit, Paul Ricca had created an organizational model that would influence American organized crime for decades. His way with leadership showed that criminal businesses could be more effective when they adopted smart management practices, kept extensive networks of real relationships, and focused on long-term lasting ability rather than short-term profits. The organization under his leadership became known for its professionalism, reliability, and strategic sophistication. These qualities made it an attractive partner for other criminal groups and a valuable service provider for real businesses and institutions that needed unusual solutions to complex problems. But Ricca's success as a leader would face its final test when federal lawyers finally put together the evidence needed to charge him with planning and blackmail in connection with the Hollywood plan. The trial that followed would show both the sophistication of the business he had created and the personal costs of leadership in America's most dangerous profession. Paul Ricca's leadership of the Chicago outfit from 1943 to the late 1950s represented the golden age of American organized crime sophistication. Under his direction, the organization changed from a collection of ethnic gangs into something like a modern international company with varied money streams, professional management structures, and strategic planning abilities that equaled real businesses. His way of running the outfit became a model that influenced organized crime operations throughout America and established standards that would last for generations. The organizational chart that Ricca put into action was deceptively simple, yet brutally effective. At the top sat the boss himself, who made all major policy decisions and solved arguments that could not be handled at lower levels. Below him, the underboss managed day-to-day operations, while the consigliere gave strategic advice and served as neutral go-betweens in inside conflicts. Street crews, each led by a capo, controlled specific areas or illegal activities, reporting up through the chain of command with military exactness. What set Ricca's outfit apart from other criminal organizations was its emphasis on real business covers and political connections. Every major operation was protected through layers of real businesses. Labor unions gave both cover and power. Construction companies offered money-hiding chances while making actual profits. Restaurants and nightclubs served as meeting places and information-gathering centers. This variety meant that even if police successfully targeted one part of their operations, the organization could keep working through its other businesses. The area under Ricca's control went far beyond Chicago's city limits. The outfit's influence went throughout Illinois, into Wisconsin, Missouri, and parts of Indiana. Each area was carefully mapped with specific crews responsible for keeping order, collecting payment, and making sure that independent criminals did not work without permission. This systematic way with area control created predictable money streams while reducing violent conflicts that might attract unwanted police attention. Ricca's personal leadership style showed his double nature as both a smart businessperson and a ruthless criminal. He preferred to solve arguments through negotiation and money rewards rather than violence, understanding that bloodshed was expensive and attracted media attention. When violence was necessary, it was used with surgical exactness, targeted specifically to send clear messages without creating unnecessary chaos. His underlings learned to appreciate this measured way, which created more stable and profitable conditions than the unpredictable violence that described other criminal organizations. The money streams under Ricca's leadership were remarkably varied and sophisticated. Illegal gambling remained a cornerstone, but it was managed with the efficiency of a real casino operation. Numbers running, bookmaking, and illegal slot machines made millions of dollars each year with exact accounting systems that tracked profits, expenses, and area performance. Loan sharking operations were done with interest rates and collection procedures that were clearly defined and consistently applied across all areas. Racketeering represented perhaps Ricca's most new contribution to organized crime method. By gaining control of key unions, particularly in construction and trucking, the outfit could influence major building projects, control hiring practices, and get payment from both employers and workers. This way created real political influence while making big money through membership dues, pension fund manipulation, and no-show jobs for organization members. The relationship between the outfit and Chicago's political establishment during Ricca's leadership, represented one of the most sophisticated corruption networks in American history. Rather than simply bribing individual officials, Ricca's organization became essential to the city's political machine. They gave money for campaigns, muscle for election security, and information gathering that helped friendly politicians keep power. In return, they got early warning of police activities, good treatment in licensing and zoning decisions, and protection from federal investigations. This political network went far beyond local Chicago politics. Through carefully built relationships, Ricca's influence reached into state government and even federal agencies. The organization kept detailed files on politicians, judges, and police officials, tracking their money situations, personal weaknesses, and family relationships. This information network let them predict government actions, find possible threats, and remove hostile officials through various forms of pressure. By 1947, the federal government's way with organized crime was going through basic changes that would finally challenge Paul Ricca's carefully built empire. The success of the Hollywood blackmail prosecutions had shown that federal agencies could successfully get inside sophisticated criminal organizations when they dedicated enough resources and used coordinated investigative techniques. The Department of Justice, made bold by these victories, began developing more aggressive strategies specifically designed to target high-level organized crime leadership. The Kefauver Committee hearings beginning in 1950 marked a turning point in American police's understanding of organized crime. For the first time, congressional investigators with the power to force people to testify, and national media attention began systematically writing down the scope and structure of criminal organizations across the United States. Paul Ricca, despite his preference for working behind the scenes, found himself pushed into the national spotlight as investigators traced connections between Chicago's outfit and criminal networks in other major cities. The televised hearings brought organized crime into American living rooms with never-before-seen detail and drama. When Ricca appeared before the committee, his carefully built image as a respectable businessperson was systematically taken apart by lawyers who presented evidence of his criminal activities covering 3 decades. His attempts to use the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination were broadcast to millions of viewers, creating a public relations disaster that hurt his ability to keep real business relationships. Federal investigators had learned valuable lessons from their earlier prosecutions of organized crime figures. Rather than focusing only on specific criminal acts, they began developing complete cases that targeted whole criminal businesses. The RICO Act, though still years away, was thought of by lawyers who understood that defeating sophisticated criminal organizations needed laws that addressed their systemic nature rather than just individual crimes. Tax cheating prosecutions that had successfully convicted Al Capone gave a model for attacking Paul Ricca's organization. Federal agents began methodically writing down his lifestyle, spending, and known sources of money, building cases that showed his inability to really pay for his standard of living. Bank records, real estate transactions, and luxury buys were carefully listed to establish patterns of unreported money that could be traced to criminal activities. Ricca's answer to strengthened federal pressure showed the sophisticated defensive strategies he had developed during his decades in organized crime. Rather than simply denying involvement in criminal activities, he created elaborate paper trails that suggested real sources for his wealth. Shell companies, complex real estate transactions, and carefully written consulting arrangements were designed to give believable explanations for his money that would be difficult for lawyers to disprove. The organization's information network became crucial during this period of increased government checking. Ricca kept sources inside police agencies who gave early warning of planned raids, wiretap installations, and grand jury proceedings. This information let the outfit change their operations, move sensitive activities, and prepare legal defenses before charges were filed. The effectiveness of this information network showed the depth of corruption that Ricca had built inside government institutions. However, the federal government's resources and determination were gradually becoming too much. Even Ricca's sophisticated defensive measures, the creation of special organized crime units inside the FBI, combined with new watching technologies and expanded wiretapping powers, began getting inside the outfit's security measures. Conversations that Ricca believed were private were being recorded, and patterns of criminal activity that had been hidden for decades were being systematically written down. The personal cost of constant federal pressure began affecting Ricca's health and family relationships. The stress of managing a criminal organization while defending against many federal investigations needed enormous physical and mental energy. His wife and children faced constant watching and harassment, making normal family life increasingly difficult. The isolation that came with being a high-profile organized crime figure was made worse by the uncertainty of knowing which associates might be cooperating with federal investigators. Paul Ricca's first important federal prison sentence came in 1959 when he was convicted of tax cheating and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His imprisonment at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana represented a dramatic change from the luxury and control he had enjoyed as head of the Chicago outfit. However, even behind bars, Ricca showed the organizational skills and strategic thinking that had made him one of America's most successful criminal leaders. Prison life for a figure of Ricca's stature and connections was unlike the experience of ordinary prisoners. His reputation came before him, earning immediate respect from both prisoners and prison staff, who understood his position in the criminal order. Rather than trying to deny his status, Ricca accepted his role as an elder statesman of organized crime, using his influence to keep order inside the prison population while continuing to direct outfit operations from behind bars. Communication with the outside world needed sophisticated methods that could avoid prison monitoring systems. Ricca developed complex codes that could be hidden in seemingly innocent letters to family members and lawyers. Visiting rights were carefully arranged to let trusted helpers receive instructions and report on organizational activities. Legal talks gave additional chances for communication, as lawyer-client privilege protected these conversations from prison watching. The challenge of keeping control over a criminal organization from prison tested every part of Ricca's leadership philosophy. He had spent decades building systems that could work without his direct daily involvement. But prison created never-before-seen communication barriers and decision-making delays. The outfit's structure, with its clear chain of command and established rules, proved strong enough to continue operations under the guidance of trusted helpers who had been trained in Ricca's methods. Tony Accardo, who served as acting boss during Ricca's imprisonment, showed the effectiveness of the leadership development programs that Ricca had put into action throughout his career. Accardo understood that his role was to preserve and protect the organization until Ricca's return, rather than to put into action basic changes that might destabilize existing arrangements. This continuity of leadership philosophy made sure that the outfit kept its area control and money streams even while its main leader was imprisoned. The prison environment also gave Ricca chances to expand his network of criminal contacts beyond the Chicago area. Federal prisons brought together sophisticated criminals from across the United States, creating unofficial conferences where criminal leaders could discuss common problems, share information, and develop cooperative arrangements. Ricca's reputation and diplomatic skills made him a natural go-between in arguments between different criminal organizations, further improving his influence inside the national organized crime community. Educational chances inside the prison system let Ricca continue developing his intellectual interests while keeping his physical health He became a strong reader, studying business management, political science, and legal procedures that might be useful upon his release. This commitment to self-improvement impressed both prisoners and prison staff, supporting his image as a sophisticated criminal leader rather than a common street thug. The psychological challenges of imprisonment were perhaps more difficult for Ricca than the physical restrictions. A man who had spent his entire adult life in positions of authority and control found himself subject to the random rules and schedules forced by prison officials. His ability to adapt to these situations without losing his dignity or authority showed the personal discipline that had contributed to his criminal success. Regular communication with family members gave crucial emotional support during his imprisonment. His wife and children visited regularly, keeping family connections that would be essential for his eventual return to civilian life. These visits also served practical purposes, letting family members pass messages and information that could not be sent through other communication channels. The money management of the outfit during Ricca's imprisonment needed careful coordination between imprisoned leadership and outside money advisors. Swiss bank accounts, real estate investments, and real business interests needed continued watching to make sure assets stayed protected and profitable. The organization's varied investment collection, developed during Ricca's years of leadership, proved sophisticated enough to make continued returns even without his direct involvement. Paul Ricca's release from federal prison in 1963 brought him back to a criminal scene that had gone through important changes during his imprisonment. The organized crime world he had controlled for 2 decades was changing in answer to increased police pressure, changing social conditions, and the appearance of new criminal chances. His ability to adapt to these changes would decide whether the Chicago outfit could keep its position of influence, or would fall like many other criminal organizations of his era. The most important change was the federal government's dramatically increased commitment to fighting organized crime. The Kennedy administration had made organized crime prosecution a national priority, creating special task forces and giving never-before-seen resources for federal investigations. The success of earlier prosecutions had encouraged Congress to pass new laws specifically designed to target criminal organizations, including expanded wiretapping powers and increased punishments for racketeering activities. Police techniques had changed considerably during Ricca's imprisonment. Electronic watching abilities that had been experimental in the 1950s were now routine tools for federal investigators. Wiretapping, room bugs, and photographic watching could write down criminal activities with exactness that made traditional security measures useless. The outfit's communication methods and meeting procedures had to be completely redesigned to address these new threats. The social and money environment of the 1960s also presented new challenges and chances for organized crime operations. Changing attitudes toward gambling, particularly the gradual making legal of various forms of betting, threatened traditional money sources while creating new real business chances. The civil rights movement was changing the political scene in ways that affected traditional corruption networks. Suburban growth was changing the geographical distribution of criminal chances while making area control more complex. Perhaps most importantly, the nature of organized crime itself was changing as new ethnic groups and criminal methods appeared to challenge established organizations. The traditional Italian-American control of organized crime was being tested by Irish, African-American, and other ethnic criminal groups who worked with different rules and organizational structures. These changes needed established crime families to either adapt their methods or risk being replaced by more flexible competitors. Ricca's answer to these challenges showed both his strategic brilliance and the limits forced by his advancing age and health problems. Rather than trying to compete directly with younger, more aggressive criminal leaders, he focused on making solid the outfit's existing advantages while gradually moving operational responsibilities. to a new generation of leaders who better understood the changing environment, the real business interests that Ricca had developed throughout his career became increasingly important as traditional criminal money sources faced strengthened police pressure. Labor union connections, construction company ownership, and political relationships gave both legal money and continued influence inside Chicago's power structure. These real businesses also offered employment and investment chances for outfit members who needed to distance themselves from obviously criminal activities. International chances were becoming increasingly important for sophisticated criminal organizations during the 1960s. Drug moving, particularly heroin bringing in from Europe and Asia, offered enormous profit potential but also brought never-before-seen police attention. Ricca's decision about whether to involve the outfit in drug moving would have lasting results for the organization's future development and survival. The generational change inside the outfit needed careful management to keep organizational stability while adapting to new situations. Younger members who had grown up during the rich post-war period had different attitudes toward risk, violence, and police than the immigrants and Depression-era criminals who had built the organization. Making these different views agree while keeping discipline and loyalty needed all of Ricca's diplomatic and leadership skills. Technology was changing not only police abilities, but also the nature of criminal chances themselves. Credit card fraud, computer-based financial crimes, and sophisticated money-hiding techniques were becoming available to criminal organizations with the technical skill to use them. The outfit's ability to hire and train members in these new criminal methods would decide their continued importance in an increasingly complex criminal environment. The final part of Paul Ricca's criminal career, from his release from prison in 1963 until his death in 1972, was described by a gradual change from active leadership to elder statesman status inside the Chicago outfit. This period showed his continued influence and strategic thinking, while showing the personal costs of a lifetime spent in organized crime. His way with retirement from criminal leadership became a model for other aging crime bosses who needed to keep respect and security, while reducing their exposure to police attention. Ricca's health had been falling since his prison years, with heart problems and other age-related conditions limiting his ability to keep the demanding schedule that had described his earlier leadership. Rather than trying to continue direct operational control, he took an advisory role that let him influence major decisions while leaving day-to-day management to younger, more energetic underlings. This change needed delicate negotiations to make sure that his reduced involvement did not create power-empty spaces or fights over who would take over inside the organization. The information network that Ricca had built throughout his career continued to give valuable information about police activities, political developments, and criminal chances. His reputation for quietness and reliability made him a trusted friend for criminal leaders throughout the United States who looked for his advice on strategic decisions. These talks improved his continued influence, while making money that added to his real investments and pension benefits. Family relationships became increasingly important during Ricca's final years. His wife had stayed loyal throughout his criminal career, managing family money and keeping social relationships during his frequent absences and imprisonments. His children, who had grown up aware of their father's criminal activities, made their own decisions about whether to keep distance from organized crime or to become involved in family business interests. Ricca's influence over these decisions showed his understanding that criminal careers inevitably affected whole families, not just individual participants. The real business interests that Ricca had built throughout his career gave both money and social respectability during his final years. Real estate investments, construction company ownership, and labor union positions offered believable explanations for his wealth, while making actual profits that could support his lifestyle without needing continued criminal activities. These real businesses also gave employment chances for family members and loyal associates who needed to move away from obviously criminal jobs. Ricca's relationships with police during his final years showed the complex relationships between long-term criminal leaders and the investigators who had followed them throughout their careers. Some federal agents who had spent decades investigating the outfit kept professional respect for Ricca's intelligence and organizational abilities, even while continuing to watch his activities for signs of continued criminal involvement. This unwilling mutual respect created an unusual situation where both sides understood the rules of their ongoing relationship. The changing nature of organized crime during the late 1960s and early 1970s presented challenges that tested Ricca's strategic thinking and adaptability. Drug moving was making enormous profits, but also attracting police attention that threatened whole criminal organizations. Ricca's careful way with drug involvement, based on his understanding of long-term risks, sometimes conflicted with the preferences of younger outfit members who were attracted by the immediate profit potential of drug moving. Social and political changes during the turbulent decade of the 1960s also affected organized crime operations and relationships. The civil rights movement, anti-war protests, and generational conflicts created new chances for criminal use, while disrupting traditional political and social arrangements that had protected established criminal organizations. Ricca's ability to move through these changes while keeping his organizational stability showed his continued strategic value even as his direct involvement in operations fell. The money arrangements for Ricca's retirement needed sophisticated planning to make sure his continued security while reducing legal weaknesses. Swiss bank accounts, real estate investments, and real business interests needed to be structured to give reliable money, while protecting assets from possible civil taking or criminal prosecution. The complexity of these arrangements showed the enormous wealth that Ricca had collected during his criminal career and his determination to preserve it for his family's benefit. Personal security remained a constant concern during Ricca's final years. His reputation and knowledge made him a possible target for both police operations, looking for information, and rival criminal groups trying to remove threats or gain advantages. The protection arrangements that surrounded Ricca during this period involved both professional security people and loyal associates who understood that their own safety might depend on protecting their former leader. Paul Ricca died of heart failure on October 11, 1972. At his home in Chicago, surrounded by family members who had stayed loyal throughout his controversial career. His death marked the end of an era in American organized crime, closing the chapter on one of the most sophisticated and successful criminal leaders in United States history. The situations of his death, peaceful and at home rather than violent as many had predicted, showed both his strategic brilliance and the respect he had kept inside the criminal community throughout his career. The funeral arrangements for Ricca showed the complex relationship between his criminal reputation and his standing inside Chicago's Italian-American community. Hundreds of people who were sad attended his funeral, including real business people, political figures, and community leaders next to known organized crime members. This gathering showed Ricca's ability to keep relationships across different parts of society while building one of America's most successful criminal organizations. Police agencies watched the funeral proceedings carefully, photographing attendees and writing down relationships that might give information for ongoing investigations. The presence of organized crime figures from across the United States showed Ricca's continued influence inside the national criminal community and gave investigators valuable information about current organized crime leadership structures. However, the respectful tone of the proceedings also showed the real affection that many people felt for Ricca as an individual, separate from their awareness of his criminal activities. The immediate result of Ricca's death created who would take over challenges inside the Chicago outfit that tested the organizational structures he had built throughout his career. Tony Accardo, who had served as acting boss during Ricca's imprisonments, took permanent leadership with the support of other senior members who understood the importance of keeping continuity during the change period. The smooth move of power showed the effectiveness of the leadership, development, and who would take over planning that Ricca had put into action throughout his time as boss. Media coverage of Ricca's death showed the mixed attitude that American society kept toward organized crime figures during the early 1970s. Newspaper death notices acknowledged his criminal activities while also noting his intelligence, organizational abilities, and influence inside Chicago's political and business communities. This complex picture showed the sophistication that Ricca had brought to organized crime leadership and the difficulty of putting him simply as a normal criminal. The money legacy that Ricca left to his family represented one of the largest personal fortunes collected by an American organized crime figure. Swiss bank accounts, real estate investments, real business interests, and carefully hidden assets gave his widow and children big wealth that could support their lifestyle for generations. The complexity and international scope of these money arrangements showed the sophisticated money management techniques that Ricca had developed throughout his criminal career. Police assessments of Ricca's career and influence gave valuable insights into the change of American organized crime during the mid-20th century. Federal agents and lawyers who had followed him throughout his career acknowledged his strategic brilliance and organizational new ideas, while writing down the enormous damage that his criminal activities had done to real institutions and society. These professional evaluations became important resources for understanding organized crime method and developing more effective police answers. The organizational model that Ricca had created for the Chicago outfit continued to influence American organized crime long after his death. His emphasis on real business covers, political corruption, and sophisticated money-hiding techniques became standard practices for criminal organizations throughout the United States. The area control systems, money variety strategies, and leadership who would take over procedures that he had developed proved lasting enough to support the outfit through decades of police pressure and social change. Academic researchers and crime historians began studying Ricca's career shortly after his death, recognizing his importance as a change figure between the simple gangsterism of the Prohibition era and the sophisticated criminal businesses that appeared during the post-war period. University courses on organized crime frequently included case studies of Ricca's leadership methods and organizational new ideas, establishing his reputation as one of the most influential criminal leaders in American history. The international influence of Ricca's organizational methods went far beyond American borders as criminal organizations in other countries studied and adapted his techniques for their own operations. European and Asian crime groups included elements of his political corruption strategies, money-hiding procedures, and area control systems into their own organizational structures. This global influence showed the universal usefulness of the management principles that Ricca had developed inside the specific situation of American organized crime. Paul, the waiter. Ricca's story represents one of the most interesting opposites in American criminal history. A man who showed both the sophistication of modern organized crime and the ruthless violence that made such organizations possible. His change from a young Italian immigrant looking for opportunity in America to one of the most powerful criminal leaders of the 20th century shows the complex relationship between real business, success, and criminal business that continues to challenge police and society today. Organizational new ideas that Ricca introduced to American organized crime. From sophisticated money-hiding techniques to complete political corruption networks, established models that continue to influence criminal organizations decades after his death. His understanding that criminal businesses could achieve greater success and long life by adopting real business practices and keeping extensive political relationships basically changed how organized crime works in America and around the world. Perhaps most importantly, Ricca's career showed that the most dangerous criminal leaders are often those who appear most respectable to the outside world. His ability to keep the front of a real business person while directing one of America's most violent and profitable criminal organizations shows the challenges that democratic societies face in finding and fighting sophisticated criminal threats. The lessons learned from studying his methods continue to inform police strategies and public policy discussions about organized crime prevention. The human cost of Ricca's criminal success, measured in the lives destroyed by violence, the institutions corrupted by bribery, and the communities damaged by criminal use, gives a serious reminder that criminal sophistication does not reduce criminal responsibility. While his organizational abilities and strategic thinking may have been impressive, the final legacy of his career was the enormous damage done to real society and the rule of law. What surprised you most about Paul Ricca's story? Was it his ability to keep a respectable public image while running one of America's most violent criminal organizations? His sophisticated way with money hiding and political corruption that came before modern financial crimes? Or perhaps his successful change from street-level violence to company-style criminal management? Let me know in the comments below. Your insights and questions help shape our understanding of how organized crime has changed throughout American history. The complexity of Ricca's character and career raises important questions about the nature of criminal leadership and the relationship between real business success and criminal business. How do we agree admiration for his organizational abilities with condemnation of his criminal activities? What can modern police learn from the techniques that made him so successful for so many decades? These are the kinds of discussions that help us better understand both criminal behavior and the social conditions that let sophisticated criminal organizations grow. If you found Paul Ricca's story as interesting as we did, you will definitely want to explore our other in-depth crime boss documentaries. Our series on Meyer Lansky shows how the mob's accountant created the financial networks that connected organized crime groups across America and the Caribbean. The Tony Accardo documentary shows how Ricca's chosen successor kept the Chicago outfit's power for decades while adapting to changing police techniques and social conditions. Our list also includes complete examinations of regional organized crime leaders whose stories light up different parts of American criminal history, from the political corruption networks of Kansas City to the labor racketeering operations that controlled major industries. These documentaries give the context needed to understand how figures like Paul Ricca were able to build and keep their criminal empires. Do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories that will keep you interested through those long, sleepless nights. Our channel specializes in the kind of detailed, involving storytelling that shows the human complexities behind history's most notorious criminal figures. These are not just stories about violence and crime. They are explorations of power, corruption, and the social conditions that let criminal organizations grow in democratic societies. Each of our documentaries needs months of research, drawing from FBI files, court records, newspaper archives, and academic sources to give the most accurate and complete pictures possible of these complex historical figures. When you subscribe, you are supporting the kind of in-depth investigative journalism that helps us understand not just what happened, but why it happened and what it means for our understanding of crime and society. Your subscription also helps us continue expanding our coverage to include lesser known but equally interesting criminal figures whose stories deserve to be told. From regional crime bosses who controlled specific industries to the political figures who led organized crime through corruption and purposeful blindness. There are countless stories that light up different parts of American criminal history. In our next video, we are going deep into the life and career of James Whitey Bulger, the most notorious crime boss in Boston history and one of the FBI's most wanted runaways for over 16 years. Unlike Paul Ricca's careful building of respectability, Bulger built his empire through a poisonous combination of brutal violence, strategic intelligence, and one of the most shocking betrayals in American police history, his decades-long relationship as an FBI informant while at the same time running one of the most violent criminal organizations in the country. Bulger's story reads like a twisted mirror image of the American dream, showing how a working-class kid from South Boston changed himself into a criminal mastermind who controlled the city's underworld while feeding information to the very federal agents who were supposed to be investigating him. His ability to play both sides of the law created a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the FBI and let him remove rivals, expand his area, and collect millions in illegal profits while enjoying virtual protection from prosecution. We will explore the psychological profile of a man who could order brutal murders while keeping the loyalty of his neighborhood, the institutional failures that let him corrupt federal police for decades, and the manhunt that finally brought him to justice. From his early years as a bank robber and his time in Alcatraz next to notorious criminals, to his rise as the clear king of Boston's underworld and his eventual capture in Santa Monica after 16 years on the run, Bulger's story shows the darkest corners of American organized crime. The Whitey Bulger documentary will examine how his methods differed from sophisticated crime bosses like Paul Ricca, showing how raw violence and strategic intelligence could be just as effective as political connections and real business covers. His relationship with his FBI handler, the corruption scandal that destroyed careers and sent federal agents to prison, and the families destroyed by his violence give a stark reminder that criminal success always comes at an enormous human cost. So, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, because the Whitey Bulger story is one you will not want to miss. It is a tale of power, corruption, celebrity, and finally tragedy that shows new sizes of the criminal world that Paul Ricca helped create, and the forces that would eventually change it beyond recognition. The rise and fall of Paul the Waiter. Ricca stands as a proof of both the possibilities and the limits of criminal ambition in American society. His story reminds us that the most dangerous threats to democratic institutions often come not from obvious enemies, but from those who understand how to work inside the system while systematically corrupting it for their own purposes. In studying his life and career, we get valuable insights into the eternal struggle between law and lawlessness that continues to shape our society today. As we close this chapter on one of America's most sophisticated criminal leaders, we are reminded that the lessons of history stay relevant to contemporary challenges. The techniques that Paul Ricca started in organizing crime, corrupting institutions, and avoiding justice continue to threaten democratic societies around the world. Understanding his methods and their results helps us recognize and fight similar threats in our own time. Sweet dreams. And remember, in the world of organized crime, the most dangerous enemies are often those who smile while they destroy everything you hold dear. Paul Ricca mastered that deception better than almost anyone in American criminal history, and his legacy continues to influence both crime and police to this day.